Do you choose to have breakfast before your training session or to start your day off? Today, we are going to discuss that and more on this episode of Monday Mindshare. Hey there, Coach Aaron here, host of SFuels Monday Mindshare, where we bring endurance and nutrition together to help you go longer. Today, I again am accompanied by Leighton, co-founder of SFuels, and today, Leighton, welcome first. I'm going to say welcome before I dive into the topic, I guess.
Sounds good, buddy. Yeah, good to see you. How you doing?
Fantastic. Yourself?
Yeah, not too bad. It's pretty steamy here, so I got the umbrella up above here to keep the sun off.
Living that umbrella lifestyle. I like it.
Yeah, exactly. I just need some type of cocktail here. Oh yeah. I was just gonna say I need a cocktail here just to finish off the view, right? It's a good look.
Well, nothing like having a train mocktail, right?
Yeah, exactly. No, for sure. You got it.
Well, today the topic is breakfast, and we're gonna shoot some ideas around of how both of us kind of kickstart our day and how we might change that slightly based on the type of training that we have coming up in that day.
Yeah.
But let's kind of dive on into what are some of the practices you do, Leighton, as far as kickstarting your day, as far as breakfast, no breakfast, train, not, whatever it is?
Yeah, I mean, general flow for me in the morning will be I probably meditate for an hour. I do that with like a white tea. After I finish that, generally that's when I do my exercise when the sun's kind of coming up. Some pretty interesting research about having your eyes exposed to the first morning transition of the sun in terms of, triggering your cortisol launch just to set your whole cycle for the day. And then I would follow that training, and then we'll talk a lot about that, obviously. But I typically follow training with some type of shake, and I'll talk about different, formulas I would have there. And it would probably be only until I'm guessing like I would do some work, whether that's physical work or work. And then sometime between 9 and 10 is probably when I would actually think about a breakfast. And again, depending upon what the day looks like would change what that profile looks like. So that's typical for me. And there's nuances in the middle there relative to, what's going on in season, outside of season, weekend, weekday. So yeah, how about yourself?
Well, if I could ask just a real quick kind of follow-up question to yours, do you adjust it based on the type of workout that you have coming up? And when you say that you're after the meditation, you get into a workout, typically what is that type of workout that you kickstart the day with?
I mean, like a lot of us, right? We've got full-time jobs. So during the week, that's in the intense part of a season, it would be a brick of some description. If it's like just a build as part of the season, like the first, early part of the season, it might be a 1 hour swim set. It might be 1.5 hours on the bike. It could be 1 hour run. That's the typical midweek stuff. And then, joining you guys there on endure.iq on the Saturday rides, they're 3 hour plus typically, right? So some of those I turn into a brick with some runs off them as you get closer to race day. So that's probably some of the nuance of the workouts. I am a morning workout person. I prefer that. Not everyone is, but it is for me.
Well, I personally find that working out in the morning kind of sets the tone for the rest of the day. And especially the athletes that I coach, I find that when I see them, if they miss some workouts, it's one of the early conversations that I have with them, because you don't necessarily know what the day is going to provide if you're in a 9 to 5 and you're working full time. Sometimes the day is going to end up, the afternoon might get a little bit busier. You have something that you got to get done, or you're pulled in a couple of different directions. And next thing you know, you're stressed out. You're not going to get that secondary workout in. So I do think that, recommending the kickstart of a workout in the day is a very, very good start to the day. But As far as kind of the way that I kickstart mine is I wake up, have about 16 ounces of water, kind of get the typically when we sleep, we are coming out a little bit dehydrated. So I'm just kind of kickstarting that with a little bit of hydration to kickstart the day. Again, very similar to you, it depends on what focus from a workout standpoint of what workout I'm getting in first. But traditionally, with that cup of water, I'm kind of setting up the today's list of to-dos of what I have to do, what I have to review, my workout plans for my athletes, contact them, see how they're feeling, if there's anything that needs to be adjusted. Typically give the old HRV for training coaches platform a good look, make sure everybody's taking their HRV and how they've responded.
That's a good point.
That's a
good point. Yeah.
And with that, I tend to get into a little bit of work actually before I do my first workout. And it's typically about 45 minutes worth of work where I'm just looking at what my athletes did the day before. Seeing, making sure that they were compliant with the workout. If they weren't, I'm asking questions of why they might not have been, and just seeing some of, I might not go into the full detail of analyzing at that part, but I at least start the process of getting into work mode there for the first 45 minutes. After that, when I am, right now is slightly a bit different, but when I am training for events, it's straight to the pool with no breakfast, and typically a set of anywhere from 3,500 meters to 5,000 meters. Then I come back, and that typically is right around that 8:30 to 9 o'clock spot. So it's almost the same time as you when you're eating, feeding the body the first time. Typically my first meal is a meal. It's not a recovery shake. I typically save that for afternoon sessions that are a little bit more meaty to me, and typically start out with a little bit of eggs, some avocado, a little bit of cheese in that case, and then get back into my work day. And that's traditionally how I do start when I'm training. And lately, as we've talked about in the past, couple episodes ago, how I'm kind of recovering from a certain situation. I'm now, instead of that swim, I'm going straight into a strength training and mobility and optimization type program in the start rather than that swim, because I feel like that's just the right time for me to get onto it when I'm fresh and set the tone for trying to getting some of the strength and development that I'm trying to accomplish right now. Again, still that first meal is kind of 8:30 to 9 o'clock.
Yeah, makes sense. Sounds good.
So as far as, we all have individuals that are going to be watching, and as we've talked both about how we start our work day, typically Monday through Friday. That is not going to say that I don't work Saturday and Sunday, because that would be a lie if I said I don't, but I still train first before I get into my workouts. But as far as the weekend, we probably have a number of individuals out there that are trying or have huge training blocks for their days. They might go from that 1 to 2 hours a day during the middle of the week, or just the entire work week, and then start to pick up maybe 5, maybe 7 hours over the course of that weekend. In those particular cases, do you personally change your consumption before your exercise, or do you change anything to start your day at those two scenarios?
No, I do. So yeah, I mean, I guess the weekend sessions, it's still come into it somewhat fasted, if you will. Haven't obviously eaten through the night and then start the workout. And I would stick with basically no carb calories for that first hour. And then just depending on the nature of the session, if it's more zone 2, I would still stay fairly low on carbohydrate. If it does have quite a bit of intensity to it, I will introduce certain levels of protein and fat into either during while I'm actually, on the trainer, or after it, I would increase the caloric load. And again, a lot of it for me has to do with not just that session being longer on the weekend there, but if it's going to be followed up with a second session that day, or a heavy back-to-back day-to-day block, if you will, that's when I would be sure to make sure that the caloric load is, really solid, so that I'm coming out of that session, with solid nutrition, and then I can hit the second session or the second day session strong. And I find that for cereals, and I'm not generic, we can get into cereals soon, but one of the kind of utilities we tried to do with Keto 3 is the ability to turn a muesli into a granola just by adding and baking, the coconut oil. So that gives you a ton more caloric load right there. And it's in an MCT form. So I think that's a good way to just kind of dial up and down that amount of caloric load relative to that session intensity or duration.
And one of the things that I have been in practice with for probably a little over a year, on especially those longer workouts on the weekends, I have started to kind of take in ketone salts before the workout itself. And I did see a research that paper that came out on, I want to say it was, I'm not going to think about it, but it was talking about how it also decreases the need to urinate. So on some of those longer rides, I found that I've been able to hold a 6-hour not having to go to the bathroom. I don't know if it's necessarily that, but especially from the utilization of nutrients, I feel like it kind of gets my fat ox turned up and moving in the earlier part of that workout. And again, like you had talked about, I typically don't add any calories for the first hour. Sometimes I try to span that out closer to 2.5 to 3 hours.
Exactly.
If I can.
Yeah.
And really, as you kind of talked about, starting to add some more caloric dense nutrition at that point. And what I find for me in that case is when I can go a 5-hour ride without really taking in any carbohydrates or really having any need for nutrients. But the problem is when I am at about 7 or 8 p.m. that night, I am on rampage looking for some calories. So by adding some of that nutrients during the back half of that longer ride, I found that it allows me to have just more sustainability with just my normal nutrition coming out of that workout. Of course, you're going to have a little bit of replenishment, but it's not going to be just, I need to go eat the refrigerator, because I've taken in those higher amounts of calories from fats and protein in the back half of that workout.
You'll see that in research, whereby they've shown that if people who skip the morning breakfast meal, that if you look at the aggregate of their blood sugar and insulin levels under the curve in the next 2 meals, so the lunch and the dinner, you'll see that even though they skipped breakfast, that there's a much higher in aggregate area under the curve of both blood sugar and insulin post lunch and post dinner in those that skipped breakfast. So your point about being ravenous and attacking the fridge is exactly that. And you can see this on that side of the argument where people skip it, and then on the other side of it where they're having this very high carbohydrate breakfast, is that it spikes and dips so quick that it creates also effectively a cycle of behaviors for the rest of the day, whereby they're kind of bouncing, to the spike and to the trough, sometimes 6 times a day.
Right.
And so, I think this is not about, going into the session and that first hour being fasted makes a ton of sense, but I don't think it is wise, particularly for training athletes, that after that session is to avoid, but really that should be a time of replenishment, get the nutrition back into the body so that you're set up for the rest of the day and you've got some balance to your blood sugar levels.
Well, and not even only just to speak of the rest of that day. I mean, sometimes I've seen athletes deprive themselves in the coming out, their workouts Monday, Tuesday, and even sometimes Wednesday are really, really just atrocious because they really depleted their body so much and didn't take in the necessary caloric needs after that workout. So it's very, very vital to at least find kind of that happy medium where you can strike and really maximize that fat oxidation, but kind of keep that level blood sugar. So really that's kind of why we were talking about adding fat and protein nutrition product at that point.
Yeah, no, for sure.
And you brought up a little bit about the cereal and other things that are out there, and I think it would be important to kind of dive into that a little bit deeper, just because we all know athletes that feel like they have to just have some calories. They end up making the choice of, hey, a cereal, it's easy. I know it works for me. Let's talk about some of the ingredients or just some of the information around cereal that might make it not the best choice in just what most people think of cereal.
Yeah, and I mean, remember that these types of products were developed in the food industry at about the same time that the food pyramid model was being defined in the 70s. You'll see the rise of, your classic cereal brands all happened in that same period because the food pyramid promoted the base of the pyramid was grain-based foods, and cereal and bread, of course, were key factors to that. Now, if you look at the glycemic index of the highest glycemic index of a natural food product, it's white rice, and it's 126, a measure of 126. And then you drop down to white bread at 101. Well, one of the most classic cereals that everyone's probably had in their life at some point, generally speaking, is cornflakes. And you would think cornflakes is generally not too bad in that it's not frosted with sugar and what have you. Yet cornflakes itself has a glycemic index of 119, sits between the highest there is possible at 126 on white bread. So even when you take something that is benign, okay, it's still highly reactive in terms of its ability to, cause a glycemic response. Even if you were to look at all bran, which, is not that much different to eating cardboard, it still has a glycemic index of 60. And when you, from a nutritional standpoint, a dietitian would only refer to something as being a low glycemic index when it's under 50. So even all bran is above that, low, if you will, rating. We looked at one study, a number of what are kids getting in terms of cereals. And we looked at this one particularly interesting study of 10 cereals for kids. And 40 to 55% of the net weight, the actual weight of the puffed or the flaked or the fried, whatever it is they're eating in the cereal, was sugar. 40 to 55% by weight was sugar. It's incredible the amount of sugar. So that, coupled with the fact that most of these grains have been polished, whereby the germ and the bran has been taken off, and you're left with just the raw carbohydrate. These are just treated like sugar. It comes through the digestive, the amylase hits it in the mouth, it hits it in the stomach. So it comes into the blood the same way that a refined sugar was. And this ruins your day. This is where your satiety, you're satisfied for only 30 minutes because it comes into the blood that fast and it's shot through the system. The insulin gets hit. It comes out of the blood and into your cells. And before you know it, right, you're setting up these classic appetite behaviors of, swings and binge eating and things like that. Mental focus is up and down. And I think cereals have a lot to answer for in terms of controlling the day, in terms of the cycles of the day. And if we can kind of take good ownership of that first meal and making sure that it is balanced in fat and fiber and protein, you're going to have a lot less of that issues for the rest of the day, Aaron.
Well, and I also see it affects performance as well. I mean, one of the things that we have research on, that when you have the insulin pumped through the body, it really suppresses that fat oxidation. And you're really at that point you're kind of riding a roller coaster, as you talked about,
Right.
with just your energy levels. And that's also going to kind of translate into your effort on certain parts of that workout as well, where you might feel like, hey, that second interval, I felt really good. The fourth interval, I felt awful. And it could be just the way that you fueled that particular workout as well.
Yeah. And I mean, if you were doing a sport like, I don't know, squash or something, where you need like instant performance for 30 minutes, right? Fine. I mean, put aside all the health issues associated with high sugar, high carbohydrate, but just for raw, I need it now.
Mm-hmm.
Fine. But the sport we're in is we're going for 4 hours in a race, 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours in a race, right? It's a very different metabolic structure. And, in nature, you won't find a food that has 30 grams of sugar and there's no fat, fiber, or protein around it. Almost always in nature, you'll find that it has a profile of a lower carbohydrate, and there'll always be some protein, some fat and fiber, even in nuts, right? You think of nuts as all fat. There's still protein there. There's still fiber there. Avocado, plenty of fiber in avocado. It's amazing. So, you won't find in nature the things being puffed up or fried or flaked, right? It just comes like, maybe you can crush it. That's about it. And then you kind of find that that's important, because how it comes through the gut, your gut has to do things with it. And that process of, processing it through the gut is slowing the release, if you will, of those nutrients. It's not going to have these big spikes. So I think generally, protein, fat, and fiber have a natural satiety effect. They slightly distend in the stomach. That's what gives that sense of fullness. Those three things have little to no effect on blood sugars. The only nuance to that would be milk proteins, which can, if you have a lot of milk by itself, it can trigger insulin up, which is kind of interesting. And but all of those, they come with material calories. So you can have some type of mix of protein, fat, and fiber, feel satisfied, feel full in the stomach. You're going to get your calories without having these ups and downs.
And Leighton, you talked about with the sport that we participate in as endurance athletes, but I even have that same conversation with some of my track runners and some of my criterium racers, because there's a little bit of sitting around in between the events. And
yeah, right.
So I even have that same conversation with them, because we want more consistency. Yeah. Because when you're asked, when that time comes up for you to perform that particular event, you got to flip on the switch. And sometimes when you add those sugary or processed foods, when it's time to flip that switch, the body's like, whoa, I don't think right now is a good time. So
right.
I feel like it translates over to a lot of different things as well, not just kind of what we're here to talk about in the endurance world as well.
Yeah, and I would use, in the spirit of cognitive readiness, right? And particularly in power, high intensity, reaction time, sports, gaming, what have you. I would lend more to what you're doing with dopamine versus caloric influence. Mm-hmm. So, whether that is some form of caffeine, etc., that's what's going to prime you to be ready for reaction speeds we know are lower with dopamine being released, etc. So I would focus there, and to your point, then have a more stable caloric load through, fat, protein, fiber, etc., rather than refined carbohydrate.
So to lead into the next part is, we've kind of talked about the morning training, we've talked about different types of breakfasts. If we were going to start to recommend actual breakfasts to athletes that were getting involved, and we've focused on, of course, more balance with proteins, with fats, what are some of the things that you would personally recommend as some of those products for nutrition?
I think, again, just staring at your day, right? What does the morning load look like? What does the rest of the day look like? And levering up or down some of those macro compounds to really emphasize what you're trying to support. If it's a, high intensity morning workout, right? Adding some more protein after that wouldn't be a bad thing, right? I think you want to have proteins that are highly assimilable, meaning like it can come into the body very fast, like a whey protein isolate or something like that. Makes sense, right? If the session is more zone 2 aerobic, if you will, you may not need as much as that. You may not need a lot of carbohydrate, and frankly, just hydration, some salts, and some fats, I think is sufficient. So, we've talked a lot about our keto 3 products, and we talk about that as being more protein than an egg, and it's got more fiber than an apple. It's got almost twice the calories as a single serve of oats. So it's fairly dense nutrition. But what I was saying before is you can modulate that up and down relative to the nature of your workout. You can add your coconut oil or even just coconut flakes for that matter,
Right.
just to kind of upload the caloric load of it. If it is that, again, you have a high intensity session, obviously, if shakes is something that works for you, some type of protein shake, or adding the protein into your cereal, that works fine. As for yogurts, everyone well knows the flavored yogurt issues in terms of the amount of sugar in those, but I would stick with the natural Greek. The profile between protein and fat in the Greek yogurt is probably the best mix. And use the whole milk versions of those, so you're getting the full fat. In fact, I even encourage athletes, for they're using yogurt and berries, something like that for the breakfast, is to add extra olive oil or coconut oil or nuts into it, just to further upregulate or heighten the fat amount in the yogurt. Shakes, obviously, where we have this revival product that has the ketones and the fats and the protein in there. But for general days where I don't have a huge high intensity workout, but I do want to start the day with some protein, I'll just take a standard isolate, also whey protein isolate. I'll add cocoa and transform to sweeten it and put some electrolytes together. And that's enough for me to kind of, give me my protein hit at the start of the day. And it's the satisfaction value is pretty high because of the fat and the protein that's in there. So, you can get through a lot of your morning just on that. We've shown a number of athletes using pancakes as a good morning option also, and doing that with almond flour and our Transform product. You can, create almost an identical texture and taste without having to use, glutinous flour and wheat flours and all this type of thing that will spike your blood sugar. So you can find that in the Life Guide, how to do that with the pancakes. And then for a savory, obviously everyone's favorite: eggs, bacon, avocado, etc. I generally try to add some type of green with eggs. Eggs, while consumption of cholesterol is not really the driver of your cholesterol levels, it's more associated with internal, endogenously produced cholesterol is really the driver of it. But suffice to say that if you're concerned there, by adding some spinach or some type of greens or peppers or what have you to your egg, it's going to handle that cholesterol. One of the things about the egg is that if you fry it, you destroy the lecithin in the egg. If you poach it or if you light boil it, you'll find that the lecithin is still intact, and the lecithin will take care of that cholesterol. So a lot of people, when they start frying this egg and they knock out the lecithin, this is when you start to have, egg that's a little deranged, and it can start causing some problems.
Well, and you kind of touched on a lot of the things that I have conversation with athletes as well. And sometimes, as you talked about adding a green, I will recommend a salad with some type of a vinegar. So oil and vinegar based, I find that has a very, very good complement as well, and kind of manages some of the aspects that you had talked about before as well. As far as the recovery, if I'm my first meal that I'm recommending to an athlete is post-workout, we assess what type of workout it is. How damaging was it to the muscle structures?
Right.
And again, like you talked about, if we have a VO2 max or 1K repeats or whatever it might be, that's going to be a little bit more detrimental to the body and the muscle structures. So by adding a quick protein that gets into the system and starts to create that environment of recovery, I find that to be a big, big factor to rebounding from a recovery standpoint, but also development standpoint as well, just because athletes are nourishing the muscle and it's just getting back to a reset and able to regrow from that point.
Yeah, and the revival formula outside of the protein that has in there, it has the glutamine and the ketones. But on the glutamine side, like we have a 5-gram dose in revival. It's a pretty high dose. But just to maybe put more context to that, particularly when I was ultra running, where you could go out and do 20K, 30K in the morning, it is injurious to your muscle fibers, that much eccentric muscle contraction. So, I would take, in addition to the revival, I would take another 5 to 8 grams. So I could be having, 12, 15 grams of glutamine in the morning, but I can tell you, I can get up the next day and do it again.
Right.
And glutamine is the highest amino acid found in muscle tissue. And obviously it's the one that depletes as you get into the type of sport we're in very rapidly. So, it is found in all foods. Glutamine is extremely abounding in foods, but just because of the way foods are manufactured these days and refined, a lot of that can go by and by. So a supplement, I find, if you really want to prove just how valuable it is, just go down to your GNC store, buy encapsulated glutamine, and do your 1K repeats you talk about, and then do them the week later with glutamine, and just note the difference on your delayed onset muscle soreness. It's palpable. It's different.
Absolutely. So, yeah. And I have so many conversations with athletes early in the process of why does it take me so long to recover? And especially as we age, we need these additional things to kind of flip the calendar day over to the next and be able to put out the same output that we had the day before, 2 days before. And these all, typically the revival product is the one that I put in the shopping cart for them, because it hits all of the things that we've kind of discussed about up to this point, where it's going to get your protein, it's going to get your glutamine, it's going to get a little bit of fat in there. So it's just going to hit all these targeted areas. So it's I'm glad that you kind of brought that up as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a rock solid product. I think the other thing too, just remember as we age also, is that protein assimilation gets worse and worse and worse. Part of that is to do with the intrinsic factors in the stomach that as we age, we lose. So, you can improve that a little bit by, taking bitter compounds, even as simple as lemon juice, and you can do other things with herbal medicine, but even with lemon juice helps to improve the assimilation of that protein. But by and large, we generally just need more as we age protein into the diet.
Absolutely. And again, it's just things change over the course of time. So what you did 2 years ago, what you did 5 years ago, what you did 10 years ago probably needs to evolve, because you've evolved a little bit yourself.
That's my explanation between my 5-hour 70.3 in Hawaii and 4.5-hour one last year in Florida. It's just that I'm a year older, right? Nothing to do with the fact that there was hills on the course or nothing like that.
That's I mean, I'm not going to allow you to get away with that.
But anyway, hey, why don't we chat about racing and race morning and breakfast, because that's a bit of a topic of its own, right?
Absolutely. And I think that would be extremely important, because I have had conversations with athletes that have kind of started their day off the wrong way. I've heard athletes of starting the day with applesauce, or a lot of different varieties of fructose or sugar, maybe even the cereal that we talked about earlier. So kind of bringing up some of the things that we refer to athletes utilizing race morning to provide them with some sustainable energy, as well as maximizing their fat oxidation early on in that race. So therefore, the endogenous glucose or glycogen on the body is there to be used when we really need it the most. So
at the end,
as far as kind of some of your sweet spots, let's start with you, and what are some of your recommendations there for race morning?
I mean, firstly, generally, like the intention, the objective of race morning meal to me is more about the mental satisfaction as opposed to I'm trying to build calories to survive this race. That should have been dealt with for the last 3 or 4 days before race morning. So that's the first point I'd call out. I might up the carbs a little bit on 2 to 3 days coming into the race, if you will. But race morning, I try to keep it very standard to what I would typically do. But for me, what feels good on the gut, I typically have a half of a Life Bar. I have to train to drink. I'm not trying to trigger, obviously, the glucose response. Again, very personal thing, but certainly the sports science research on when they look at what people had before these races and they look at those that had gut problems. Yes, high fructose and sugars and all that absolutely is a key factor. The other one that came up in the research was coffee. And it was not, it was more of a lower digestive tract issue, meaning bloating and loosen the bowels and things like that with those that had coffee. Now, everyone can have coffee day to day, but how does coffee perform when you're going to go and do a 4, 8, 12-hour endurance thing, right? So I think you need to work that out for yourself and really make sure that that's not going to be a problem for you. And the reason why it's, you find out later or in a race is because day to day in training, you typically don't do 8-hour sessions.
Right.
So it takes that time to get through the gut, go through the small intestine, it gets down then into the large gut. And here's where the problem starts. And that is, 6, 7, 8 hours into the race. And now you got the problem. So anyway, I think I would just encourage people just to test that out, make sure it's not a problem with them. I might have some Greek yogurt, a few berries, just a sprinkle of keto-3. It's all about just feeling satisfied for me, Aaron.
Well, and I think this is probably one of the most visited topics that we've talked about since I've started leading the Monday Mindshare program, and it's because it's very valuable, because it's a conversation that I constantly hear, that people either overeat on the morning or they're just taking things that are not setting them up for success.
Right.
And I think one of the things that we've consistently said is keep it simple. Keep it, like you started out by saying, it's just making sure you're satiated and ready to focus on the other things that are about ready to take on. If you're bursting at your seams because you've eaten that much because, I'm going to have a big day, you're not going to have a great day typically on top of that. So it is something that is very, very individualized, but it is still something that there are the typical go-tos that aren't going to cause that initial issue. And everybody has something that might turn their stomach more than somebody else's, but knowing that and avoiding some of those products. And I try to keep it simple with some hard-boiled eggs, and that's something that just kind of works for me. It's not going to be too big. I've talked to a couple of people. I have raced on sushi before, and I've raced really well on that. And when I tell people that, they're like, huh? But it works for me. So
actually, I was going to ask you, I was going to make the point. People should also test for what they're eating, if it's going to be a fresh or a saltwater swim. It's one thing putting stuff down your mouth and then swallowing fresh water, but you swallow a bunch of salt water, it could be a very different outcome. So I think testing that too for people, so they know kind of how, maybe that's why your sushi works, right? And the saltwater swim, it's fine.
That is because I do race out on the West Coast quite a bit in the States, so I'm typically racing in some type of fresh salt water. So maybe that is, but that's a good point. And it's just the point of not over consuming, not taking in just doses of cereal or sugar, these things, just because it's not going to set you up for success. And as we push a lot of individuals, especially kind of leading in that hour before, we're recommending train. Some individuals like to add the primed. I mean, some don't. So it's just kind of where it is a test. And sometimes when we go out there the very first time, just like we're racing for the first time, we might not hit a home run. We might not strike that perfect balance that first time, but documenting, taking the time to like know what you did, because if it was successful, you're most likely going to want to repeat that.
Exactly.
If it wasn't successful, you want to remove that from all opportunities, because you don't want to experience that bad race after that again. So it's just keeping it simple and knowing what works for you. But sometimes it's finding what works for you is important.
Yeah. And I mean, if folks want to dial in and just have a one-on-one and kind of really go deep into what they're doing, or if they've had problems and they can't work out what it is, the problem, happy to jump on a call and talk through kind of, food groups and things. Even traveling internationally, I think I mentioned this when we were in Hawaii, just the difference in water out of the tap between being at home and then travel somewhere else. Theoretically out of the tap should be okay, but the slight differences can mess around, right? So, happy to help if people want to have some one-on-one time on this.
But I think both of us would be open to have those conversations with anybody. So reach out to either one of us. But outside of that, I mean, I think we've covered quite a bit of good content here. And I feel like if there's some additional questions, we're going to rely on our Monday Mindshare viewers to open up some questions, and we'll be happy to answer them or take care of them in a future Monday Mindshare. So
sounds good.
I think, again, I appreciate you being on this episode, and
good.
It seems like we're in a real good flow as of late.
Yeah, no, I'm enjoying it. I mean, it's just middle of the season, right? There's different things coming up, and how people are reacting, responding, their experiences in these races that are triggering some of these topics. So like you said, if anyone's got topics they want to double click on, throw it at us and we'll tee it up for subsequent shows for sure.
Well, we appreciate you tuning in to this episode of Monday Mindshare. That's Leighton on the other side. I'm Coach Aaron, and let's go longer.
Thanks, buddy. Good to see you.